Before we go into the history of England, here is a quick overview of its geographical location. England is a country that's part of the United Kingdom. It shares its land borders with Wales to its west and Scotland to its north. The Irish Sea lies northwest of England and the Celtic Sea to the southwest. England is separated from continental Europe by the North Sea to the east and the English Channel to the south. The area now called England was first inhabited by modern humans during the Upper Palaeolithic period around 40,000 years ago, and it takes its name from the Angles, a Germanic tribe deriving its name from the Angular Peninsula. They settled there during the 5th and 6th centuries. After the last ice age, only large mammals such as mammoths and bison survived. Roughly 11,000 years ago, when the ice sheets began to recede, humans repopulated the area. Genetic research suggests they came from the northern part of the Iberian Peninsula, which today is parts of southern Western Europe occupied by Spain and Portugal. As seas rose, it was separated from Ireland 10,000 years ago and from mainland Europe 2,000 years later. The Beaker culture arrived around 2500 BC, introducing drinking and food vessels constructed from clay, as well as vessels used as reduction pots to smelt copper ores. It was during this time that major Neolithic monuments such as Stonehenge and Avebury were constructed. By heating together tin and copper, which were in abundance in the area, the Beaker culture people made bronze and later iron from iron ores. The development of iron smelting allowed the construction of better ploughs, advancing agriculture, as well as the production of more effective weapons for the Celtic people. During the Iron Age, Celtic culture, deriving from the Hallstatt and the Latin cultures, arrived from Central Europe. Britannic was the spoken language during this time. Society was tribal, according to Ptolemy's Geographia. There were around 20 tribes in the area. Earlier divisions are unknown because the Britons were not literate. Like other regions on the edge of the empire, Britain had long enjoyed trading links with Romans. Julius Caesar of the Roman Republic attempted to invade twice in 55 BC. Although largely unsuccessful, he managed to set up a client king from the Trinovantes. The Romans invaded Britain once again in 43 AD during the reign of Emperor Claudius, subsequently conquering much of Britain. The area was now incorporated into the Roman Empire as the Britannia Province. The best known of the native tribes who attempted to resist were the Catuvellauni, led by Caraticus, and then later an uprising led by Boudicca, Queen of Iceni. This ended with Boudicca's suicide following her defeat at the Battle of Watling Street. The author of one study of Roman Britain suggested that from 43 AD to 84 AD, Roman invaders killed somewhere between 100,000 and 250,000 people from a population of perhaps 2 million. This era saw a Greco-Roman culture prevail, with the introduction of Roman law, Roman architecture, aqueducts, sewers, many agricultural items, and silk. In the 3rd century, Emperor Septimus Severus died in modern-day York, where Constantine was subsequently proclaimed emperor. There is debate about when Christianity was first introduced. It was no later than the 4th century, probably much earlier. According to Bede, missionaries were sent from Rome by Eleutherius at the request of chieftain Lucius of Britain in 180 AD. This was to settle the differences as to Eastern and Western ceremonials which were disturbing the church. These are traditions linked to Glastonbury, claiming an introduction through Joseph of Arimathea, while others claim through Lucius of Britain. By 410, during the decline of the Roman Empire, Britain was left exposed by the end of Roman rule in Britain, and the withdrawal of Roman army units to defend the frontiers of continental Europe and partake in civil wars. Celtic, Christian, monastic and missionary movements flourished in the 5th and 6th century. This period of Christianity was influenced by the ancient Celtic culture in its sensibilities, polity, practices and theology. Local congregations were centred in a monastic community, and monastic leaders were more like chieftains as peers, rather than in more hierarchical systems of the Roman-dominated church. Roman military withdrawals left Britain open to invasion by pagan seafaring warriors from northwestern continental Europe. Chiefly the Saxons, Angles, Jutes and Frisians, who had long raided the coasts of the Roman province. These groups then began to settle in increasing numbers over the course of the 5th and 6th centuries, initially in the eastern part of the country. Their advance was contained for some decades after the Britons' victory at the Battle of Mont-Badon, but subsequently resumed, overrunning the fertile lowlands of Britain and reducing the area under Britannic control to a series of separate enclaves in more rugged country to the west end of the 6th century. Contemporary texts describing this period are extremely scarce, giving rise to its description as the Dark Age. The nature and progression of the Anglo-Saxon settlement of Britain is consequently subject to considerable disagreement. The emerging consensus is that it occurred on a large scale in the south and the east, but it was less substantial in the north and west, where Celtic languages continued to be spoken even in areas under Saxon control. Roman-dominated Christianity had in general disappeared from conquered territories, but was reintroduced by missionaries from Rome led by Augustine from 597 onwards. Disputes between the Roman and Celtic-dominated forms of Christianity ended in victory for the Roman tradition at the Council of Whitby in 664, which included discussions about tonsures, which are clerical haircuts, and the date of Easter, but more significantly, about the difference in Roman and Celtic forms of authority, theology, and practice. During the settlement period, the lands ruled by incomers seem to have been fragmented into numerous tribal territories. But by the 7th century, when substantial evidence of the situation again becomes available, these came together into roughly a dozen kingdoms, including Northumbria, Mercia, Wessex, East Anglia, Essex, Kent, and Sussex. Over the following centuries, this process of political consolidation continued. The 7th century saw a struggle for hegemony between Northumbria and Mercia, which in the 8th century gave way to Mercian preeminence. In the early 9th century, Mercia was displaced as the foremost kingdom by Wessex. Later in that century, escalating attacks by the Danish culminated in the conquest of the north and east of England, overthrowing the kingdoms of Northumbria, Mercia, and the east of England. Wessex, under Alfred the Great, was left as the only surviving English kingdom, and under his successors it steadily expanded at the expense of the kingdoms of the Danelaw. This brought about the political unification of England, first accomplished under Athelstan in 927 and definitively established after further conflicts by Edred in 953. A fresh wave of Scandinavian attacks from the late 10th century ended with conquest of this united kingdom by Sven Forkbeard in 1013, and again by his son Knut in 1016, turning it into a short-lived North Sea Empire that included Denmark and Norway. However, the native royal dynasty was restored with the accession of Edward the Confessor in 1042. King Henry V at the Battle of Agincourt fought on St Crispin's Day and concluded with an English victory against a larger French army in the 100 Years' War. A dispute over the succession to Edward led to the Norman conquest of England in 1066, accompanied by an army led by Duke William of Normandy. The Normans themselves originated from Scandinavia and had settled in Normandy in the late 9th and early 10th centuries. This conquest led to the almost total dispossession of the English elite and the replacement by a new French-speaking aristocracy whose speech had a profound and permanent effect on the English language. Subsequently, the House of Plantagenet from Anjou inherited the English throne under Henry II, adding England to the budding Angevin Empire of fiefs the family had inherited in France, including Aquitaine. They reigned for 3 centuries, some noted monarchs being Richard I, Edward I, Edward II, and Henry V. The period saw changes in trade and legislation, including the signing of the Magna Carta, an English legal charter used to limit the sovereign's power by law and protect the privileges of free men. Catholic monasticism flourished, providing philosophers, and the universities of Oxford and Cambridge were founded with royal patronage. The Principality of Wales became a Plantagenet fief during the 13th century, and the lordship of Ireland was given to the English monarchy by the Pope. During the 14th century, the Plantagenet and the House of Valois both claimed to be legitimate claimants of the House of Capet, and with it France. The two powers clashed in the 100 Years' War, and also the Black Death epidemic hit England starting in 1348. It eventually killed up to half of England's inhabitants. From 1453 to 1487, civil war occurred between 2 branches of the royal family, the Yorkists and the Lancastrians, known as the War of the Roses. Eventually it led to the Yorkists losing the throne entirely to a Welsh noble family, the Tudors, a branch of a Lancastrian-headed Henry Tudor who invaded with Welsh and Breton mercenaries, gaining victory at the Battle of Bosworth Field, where the Yorkist king Richard II was killed. King Henry VIII ruled for 36 years between 1491 and 1547. During the Tudor period, the Renaissance reached England through Italian courtiers who reintroduced artistic, educational, and scholarly debate from classic antiquity. England began to develop naval skills and exploration to the west intensified. King Henry VIII broke from communion with the Catholic Church over issues relating to his divorce under the Acts of Supremacy in 1534, which proclaimed the monarch head of the Church of England. In contrast with what much of the European Protestants, the roots of the split were more political than theological. He also legally incorporated his ancestral land, Wales, into the Kingdom of England with the 1535 and 1542 Acts. Competing with Spain, the first English colony in the Americas was founded in 1585 by explorer Walter Raleigh in Virginia and named Roanoke. The Roanoke colony failed and is known as the Lost Colony after it was found abandoned on return of the late supply ship. With the East India Company, England also competed with the Dutch and French in the East. During the Elizabethan period, England was at war with Spain. An armada sailed from Spain in 1588 as part of a wider plan to invade England and re-establish a Catholic monarchy. The plan was thwarted by bad coordination, stormy weather, and successful harrying attacks by an English fleet under Lord Howard of Effingham. The failure did not end the threat. Spain launched two further armadas in 1596 and 1597, but both were driven back by storms. The political structure of the island changed in 1603, when the King of Scots, James VI, a kingdom which had been long-time rival to English interests, inherited the throne of England as James I, thereby creating a personal union. He styled himself as the King of Great Britain, although this had no basis in English law. Under the support of King James VI, the authorised King James version of the Holy Bible was published in 1611. It was the standard version of the Holy Bible read by most Protestant Christians for hundreds of years until modern revisions were produced in the 20th century. The English Restoration restored the monarchy under King Charles II and peace after the English Civil War. Based on conflicting political, religious and social positions, the English Civil War was fought between the supporters of Parliament and those of King Charles I, who were known as roadheads and cavaliers respectively. This was an interwoven part of the wider, multifaceted wars on the three kingdoms involving Scotland and Ireland. The parliamentarians were victorious. Charles I was executed and the kingdom replaced by the Commonwealth. Leader of the Parliament forces, Oliver Cromwell, declared himself Lord Protector in 1653. A period of personal rule followed, and after Cromwell's death and the resignation of his son Richard as Lord Protector, Charles II was invited to return as monarch in 1660, in a move called the Restoration. After the Glorious Revolution of 1668, it was established that the King and Parliament should rule together, though Parliament would have the real power. This was established the Bill of Rights in 1689. Among the written legislation set down were that the law could only be made by Parliament and could not be suspended by the King. Also that the King could not impose taxes or raise an army without prior approval of Parliament. Also since that time, no British monarch has entered the House of Commons when it is in sitting, which is annually commemorated at the state of the opening of Parliament by the British monarch. When the doors are opened, the House of Commons are slammed in the face of the monarch's messenger, symbolising the rights of Parliament and its independence from the monarch. With the founding of Royal Society in 1660, science was greatly encouraged. In 1666, the Great Fire of London gutted the City of London, but it was rebuilt shortly afterwards, with many significant buildings designed by Sir Christopher Wren. In Parliament, two factors had emerged, the Tories and the Whigs. Though the Tories initially supported Catholic King James II, some of them, along with the Whigs during the Revolution of 1688, invited Dutch Prince William of Orange to defeat James and ultimately to become William II of England. Some English people, especially in the north, were Jacobites and continued to support James and his sons. After the Parliaments of England and Scotland agreed, the two countries joined in political union to create the Kingdom of Great Britain in 1707 to accommodate the union. Institutions such as the law and national churches of each remained separate. Under the newly formed Kingdom of Great Britain, output from the Royal Society and other English initiatives combined with the Scottish Enlightenment to create innovations in science and engineering. While the enormous growth in British overseas trade protected by the Royal Navy paved the way for the establishment of the British Empire, domestically it drove the Industrial Revolution, a period of profound change in social, economic and cultural conditions in England, resulting in industrialised agriculture, manufacture, engineering and mining, as well as new and pioneering road, rail and water networks to facilitate their expansion and development. The opening of northwest England's Bridgewater Canal in 1761 ushered in the Canal Age in Britain. In 1825, the world's first permanent steam locomotive-hauled passenger railway, the Stockton and Darlington Railway, opened to the public. Cotton mills in Manchester, the world's first industrial city, also opened in the 1820s. During the Industrial Revolution, many workers moved from England's countryside to a new and expanding urban industrial areas to work in factories, for instance at Birmingham and Manchester, dubbed Workshop of the World and Warehouse City. England maintained relatively stability throughout the French Revolution. William Pitt the Younger was British Prime Minister for the reign of George III. During the Napoleonic Wars, Napoleon planned to invade from the southeast. However, this failed to manifest, and the Napoleonic forces were defeated by the British at sea by Lord Nelson and on land by Duke of Wellington. The Napoleonic Wars fostered a concept of Britishness and united national British people shared with the Scots and Welsh. London became the largest and most populated metropolitan area in the world during the Victorian era, and trade within the British Empire, as well as the standing of the British military and navy, was prestigious. Political agitation at home from radicals such as Chartists and suffragettes enabled legislative reform and universal suffrage. Power shifts in East Central Europe led to World War I. Hundreds of thousands of English soldiers died fighting for the United Kingdom as part of the Allies. 2 decades later, in World War II, the United Kingdom was again one of the Allies. At the end of the phony war, Winston Churchill became the wartime Prime Minister. Developments in warfare technology saw many cities damaged by air raids during the Blitz. Following the war, the British Empire experienced rapid decolonisation, and there was a speeding up of technological innovations. Automobiles became the primary means of transport, and Frank Whittle's development of the jet engine led to wide air travel. Residential patterns were altered in England by private motoring and by the creation of the National Health Service, the NHS, in 1948. The UK's NHS provided publicly funded healthcare to all UK permanent residents, free at the point of need, being paid for from general taxation. Combined, these charges prompted the reform of the local government in England in the mid-20th century. Since the 20th century, there has been significant population movement to England, mostly from other parts of the British Isles, but also from the Commonwealth, particularly the Indian subcontinent. Since the 1970s, there has been a large move away from manufacturing and an increasing emphasis on the service industry. As part of the United Kingdom, the area joined a common market initiative called the European Economic Community, which became the European Union since the late 20th century. The administration of the United Kingdom has moved towards devolved governance in Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland. England and Wales continues to exist as a jurisdiction within the United Kingdom. Devolution has stimulated a greater emphasis on a more English-specific identity and patriotism. There is no devolved English government, but an attempt to create a similar system on a sub-regional basis was rejected by referendum.